Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, hi. My name is Jessica, and welcome to my channel where I explore new true crime or creepy history topics each week. Although I've been massively slacking on the creepy history portion of the channel recently, so if you have any topic suggestions for that, please let me know. But last week we talked about Michael Mastromarino and his black market body snatching band of hooligans. If you're interested in that story, I will make sure to have it linked up here in the card for you. Feel free to check it out when you're done here. And if you're just interested in true crime or the macabre in general, and you'd like to join me back here each week, go ahead and subscribe to my channel down below. Today, we're going to be discussing the case of Angel Bumpass, or a case that could otherwise be known as the one that really chaps my ass. Seriously though, this case makes me so mad. And I have to assume that by the end of the video, a lot of you guys will be mad as well. So now that you know the direction we're headed in, let's go ahead and get started. Angel Kamika Bumpass was born on March 3rd, 1995 in Chattanooga, Tennessee, to her mother, Tamika Bumpass. However, Angel was not actually raised by Tamika. Sadly, Angel was born into a very difficult family dynamic. Her father was barely involved in her life growing up, and her mother was incarcerated when she was just 6 years old. While in the process of being arrested, Tamika actually managed to get a hold of her arresting officer's gun and shoot her in the chest, before she then turned the gun on a passerby. She forced this random man out of his car, stealing it and attempting to flee. However, she was quickly rearrested. She managed to rack up 30 different charges from this incident, all of which she pled guilty to, effectively securing herself a 40-year prison sentence. Following her mother's imprisonment, Angel lived with her grandparents Shirley Bumpass and Bayless Smith until she was 16 years old. But from what I can gather, this wasn't like hot cocoa every night and fresh baked cookies every day like we probably all want to believe living with our grandparents would be. Instead, Angel describes the environment at her grandparents' house as cold and unloving. She recalls never feeling close with her grandparents and often feeling sad that they didn't do things like tell her they loved her or tuck her in at night. And because of her difficult home life, Angel was really shy and reserved. She didn't have the same level of self-confidence that a child would have if they grew up in a nurturing and stable home. So Angel kept to herself, especially at school, mostly just focusing on her academics. She consistently made her way onto the star roll at Brown Middle School before she graduated high school with good grades, and she went on to enroll in Jefferson Community and Technical College. She was accepted into their nursing program, and she was all set to begin her classes in the fall of 2018, all while working a full-time job and single-handedly caring for her 2 daughters. Up to this point, her story sounds remarkably admirable to me, and I know I'm not alone in that conclusion. For a long time, Angel was looked at as sort of a rags to riches story. She wasn't wealthy by any means, but people really respected the way she had managed to claw her way out of her family's destructive cycle and find a way to better her and her daughters' lives. It just seems like she was a pretty positive person to be around. She's described by those who knew her growing up as creative and artistic, and she was not the type to frequently get in trouble or lash out. Quite the opposite, really, as far as any reports I've seen go. She seems to have been a relatively good kid, working her way to becoming a well-rounded adult. Which is why it was especially shocking in May of 2018 when 2 detectives knocked on Angel Bumpass's door at 6 a.m. and served her with an arrest warrant for felony murder for an incident that took place all the way back in 2009. Yes, your math is correct. Angel was being arrested and charged for a murder that took place when she was just 13 years old. If you have whiplash, don't worry, I'm sure you're not alone. Just slap some ice on it and strap in, because we're about to journey back in time. Friday, January 16th, 2009. Linda Bonner returns from work to her home at 4707 Enterprise Lane, just as she had every single day for years. Little did she know that that day in particular, her entire life would be completely flipped upside down the minute she walked through her front door. Sadly, Mrs. Bonner made her way inside to find her husband, 68-year-old Franklin Bonner, bound to the kitchen table and chair with duct tape and completely unresponsive. She ran hysterically to her neighbor's house, begging for their help before she then called 911. Unfortunately, she, as well as emergency services, were too late. Mr. Bonner had passed away from suffocation after having duct tape placed over his nose and mouth. Despite the subsequent investigation, little to no tangible evidence was able to be recovered from the scene. So instead, police tried to piece things together based off of one of two theories. Either theory A, Franklin Bonner was targeted due to his reputation as a lottery man in the neighborhood, which I guess means he was known to deal with a lot of money. Or theory B, he'd been targeted due to the fact that both he and his wife were known to sell marijuana to people in the neighborhood. But even with these potential whys and some fingerprints that they were able to recover from the scene, they quickly exhausted every possible lead they could scrape together. None of the fingerprints they'd recovered were able to be identified, and ultimately the case grew cold for over a decade. It wasn't until 8 years later, when Angel Bumpass was pulled over for a simple traffic violation, that the case really took off. Angel was pulled over in 2017 for failing to appear in court for a traffic ticket. And because of this incredibly minor violation, she was taken to the police station and fingerprinted. While yes, that is routine, sure, what no one was expecting, including Angel, was that when those fingerprints were uploaded to the database, they came back as a match to one of the fingerprints that police had recovered from the duct tape left at the scene of Franklin Bonner's murder. Because of this, Angel was, as previously stated, arrested and charged with felony murder. Now, felony murder, which is when someone dies during the commission of a dangerous or enumerated crime, in my opinion, is a massive uphill battle for the accused. Because now, Angel could be found guilty for felony murder just for having been at the Bonner residence when the robbery took place. Intent to cause harm to someone does not matter in a case of felony murder. If the jury believes that the presence of Angel's fingerprint on that piece of duct tape is enough to prove she was there the day of the crime, that's all they need to convict her. So in the blink of an eye, this young mother of two went from an aspiring nursing student with a promising future to an accused murderer staring down the barrel of spending nearly the rest of her life in prison. Again, for something that happened when she was just 13 years old. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, but I will do my best to keep it concise. I'm going to try and take it point by point, starting with, could Angel realistically have committed this crime? I've said it a million times already, but at the time of Franklin Bonner's murder, Angel Bumpass was 13 years old. She is confirmed to have attended school on the day in question, which would have put her home around 2:45. The murder is believed to have happened between 2 and 4 p.m., obviously before Mrs. Bonner returned home from work. So as far as timing goes, is it feasible that Angel could have gotten off the bus, made the 44-minute walk from her house to the Bonner residence, through streets with no sidewalks, mind you, before she then utilized the remaining 15 minutes of the given time frame to rip a piece of duct tape off a roll? I suppose it's possible. I personally think that in and of itself is a stretch, but we're trying to be objective here. So operating under the assumption that she could have been there when the crime took place, I think we can all agree that it is highly unlikely that any 13-year-old girl would be able to subdue a full-grown man all by herself. If Angel actually was in the house that day, and that's a big if, it's highly probable that she was not there alone. A theory that's actually backed up by the fact that there are 9 additional sets of fingerprints that were pulled from the duct tape left at the Bonner's home that have yet to be identified. So here's my next question. Did Angel even know Franklin Bonner? The answer is not really ish. Obviously, I said that he was kind of known throughout the neighborhood for selling pot, and he's confirmed to have sold weed to her grandparents from time to time. And on top of that, Angel's grandfather would sometimes complete handiwork jobs around the Bonner's house. So I guess, yes, you could determine that as a possible link between Angel and Mr. Bonner. But it's hardly a smoking gun, at least in my opinion. I mean, I didn't know the people that my dad worked with or bought pot from when I was 13. So why assume that Angel definitely would have known those things when she was a kid? I'm sorry, but I just don't think that that's a realistic assumption to make. I'd also like to touch on the fact that prior to the date in question, and in all of the years following, Angel was literally never in trouble, at least not that I could find. The worst thing she'd ever found herself caught up in was the aforementioned traffic violation. By that standard, I'm also highly skeptical of her involvement. You're telling me that this 13-year-old girl either committed a brutal robbery that resulted in a murder, or at the very least, she witnessed a brutal robbery that resulted in a murder. And then she just walked away scot-free afterwards. No resulting behavioral or psychological issues. None whatsoever. Just went on to be not only normal, but a highly self-sufficient and contributing member of society. Does not compute. I'd have to imagine that there would be some sort of psychological repercussions after witnessing or participating in that at such a young age. Obviously, you're free to come to your own conclusions as far as that goes, but I personally don't believe that something that traumatic could just not affect someone. Now, circling back to Angel's fingerprints. Riddle me this. The Bonner home was left in absolute shambles. It's often referred to as having been completely ransacked. You can look at crime scene photos for yourself online if you so choose, but I mean, it's clear just from what we've discussed so far that a lot went on there that day. So with that in mind, explain to me how Angel's fingerprints were not found anywhere else in that home. Not on one single permanent fixture in that house. No doorknob, wall, chair, light switch, nothing. Just 2 partial prints on a piece of duct tape. How would that even be possible? And don't come at me with anything about gloves. She didn't wear gloves and not wear gloves at the same time. You can't have it both ways. You can't force a square peg into a round hole just to fit a particular narrative. So I genuinely love if the investigators of this case could explain to me how she left fingerprints on some duct tape, but nowhere else at the scene, all while participating in overpowering and subduing a grown man. Before ransacking his home. But they say they have her fingerprint, so how else could it have gotten there? Well, if the partial fingerprints in question truly are Angel's, there is a possible explanation. But before I get into that, let's break down fingerprint science just a little bit. The information I'm about to give you is courtesy of the California Innocence Project. The process begins with a deposited or latent print found at the scene of a crime. If the print is detailed enough, fingerprint analysts visually compare the latent print from the crime scene to the fingerprint of a suspect. Analysts compare qualities such as the general shape of the print, the shape and depth of the ridges in the print, and the length of each ridge. The analyst then relies on his or her experience to make an evaluation of the prints, either to identify a match or exclusion. Another analyst then verifies the first analyst's conclusions. Through this process, a suspect is determined to have deposited the latent print or not. It is often said that no 2 people's fingerprints are exactly alike, and that therefore a latent print found at the scene of a crime which matches the suspect's prints has to mean the suspect left the print at some point in the past. This assertion, however, is not based on any studies, research, or analysis. In other words, there is no scientific basis for the belief that fingerprints are unique to each person. The main problem with fingerprint analysis is one consistent with many areas of forensic science: subjectivity. Instead of relying on tested scientific methods, the process is mostly based on the subjective beliefs of the analyst. So, what does it take to actually determine a match? The average fingerprint can contain upwards of 150 unique ridge characteristics. And to determine a match, an analyst must identify anywhere from 8 to 20 common points. So, only 13% or less of the points need to match. I'm sure there's some scientific explanation as to why those are the specific parameters that forensic science has elected to go by, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't sound a little less conclusive when presented in percentages like that. Not to mention that you're expecting to pull an accurate fingerprint off of a piece of duct tape that not only inherently has its own set of dips and ridges, but that has also been crumpled and smushed and pushed up against a person's face. I don't know, it just doesn't sound like a strong enough piece of evidence to structure an entire case around. I'll list some additional individuals' cases down below that were convicted based off of fingerprint evidence and subsequently overturned, just in case people are still skeptical. Okay, so we've gone over the fact that it's possible that the fingerprints aren't hers at all. But let's play devil's advocate and discuss if they are in fact Angel's fingerprints, how they may have innocently gotten there. If you'll remember, I briefly explained earlier that sometimes Angel's grandfather would work as a handyman for the Bonners. And what is readily available in most tool bags and on most workbenches? Maybe duct tape? And what do kids like to mess with? Trick question, because the answer is literally everything. I used to fuck around with everything on my dad's workbench and in our garage when I was a kid. Just out there nailing into small scraps of wood for no reason other than the fact that I was bored. I'm sure on multiple occasions I messed around with duct tape that I found in my parents' house or laying around their garage. So in my opinion, it is 100% possible that the duct tape that was found at the Bonners house at one point was at Angel's grandparents' house. So she could have, at a completely separate point in time, taken a piece of duct tape off of that roll and left her fingerprints on the remaining tape. Then if that tape was taken to the Bonners by her grandfather, where it was subsequently forgotten and used as an item of opportunity by the actual killer, boom. Now you have a plausible explanation as to how Angel's fingerprints could have ended up on the duct tape at the scene without her so much as ever stepping foot in the Bonner household. That, my friends, is what you call reasonable doubt. So with all this, again, reasonable doubt, what even was the prosecution's case, you may be wondering? Well, great, because we're about to jump into the details of the trial. The prosecution argued that Angel acted in conjunction that day with a man named Mallory Vaughn. They theorized that together she and Vaughn bound, gagged, robbed, and ultimately murdered Franklin Bonner. She, a 13-year-old girl at the time, was believed to have acted alongside a grown man who, at 26 at the time, was twice her age. Okay. That certainly would explain how Angel could have even possibly been able to subdue a grown man. I'll give them that. But the issue lies in the fact that throughout their entire argument, the prosecution was unable to prove in any capacity that there was ever a friendship, a relationship, an acquaintanceship, anything, ever, between Angel Bumpass and Mallory Vaughn. They could not provide proof of a phone call, a text message, a conversation, a photo, a letter by carrier pigeon. They could not provide proof of anything having ever taken place between these two people who now found themselves as co-defendants on this case. Both Mallory and Angel have always unwaveringly maintained that they have never met, and that before they were charged together, they each had no idea who the other was. The prosecution was also unable to provide a single shred of physical evidence that could tie Mallory Vaughn to the scene. Not even a questionable, partial, latent print. Nope. Mallory had become Angel's co-defendant thanks to a statement provided to police by a jailhouse informant. Mallory was not on police radar for Franklin Bonner's murder until a federal inmate by the name of Nicholas Cheatham came forward to police. He contacted the investigators and ultimately ended up testifying under oath that Mallory had confessed to him that he had killed Franklin Bonner. He claimed that Mallory told him he was going to, quote, put a lick on someone named the Lottery Man, unquote, and that he later told him that he, quote, messed up and duct taped someone like a mummy and it went wrong, unquote. From what I can gather, Nicholas Cheatham was a casual acquaintance of Mallory Vaughn's, and that when he came forward with this information, he was serving time for a robbery and attempting to strike a deal for less time by turning over information supposedly related to Franklin Bonner's murder. Mallory's defense attorney tried desperately to discredit Nicholas. He focused mainly on the fact that his story had seemed to change from interview to interview, that initially he'd said he didn't know anything about the murder until investigator Carl Fields had spoken to him, but later he said that he learned about it from the news. And as far as Angel goes, it wasn't until a much later interview that Nicholas ever mentioned a female accomplice. Honestly, the whole testimony was kind of a flop and really did not make for a strong case against Mallory. As for the case against Angel, the prosecution relied heavily on three main factors. Obviously, the fingerprint, which at this point I've spoken about ad nauseum, so I refuse to open that can of worms again. So the fingerprint, a supposed phone call from Angel's grandmother to the deceased, and a phone call between Angel's two brothers, both of whom were incarcerated at the time of the investigation and the trial. Hi, Editing Jessica here to clarify something I misspoke on. The phone call between Angel's brothers was actually considered hearsay, therefore was not admissible in court during her trial. However, it was considered in the case against her prior to her trial. Therefore, I wanted to leave the information in because I still feel as though it's important to the overall picture, but I do apologize for the error. Starting with Grandma's call, during one of the original police interviews with Shirley, a detective claims that she admitted to having spoken to Franklin Bonner on the phone shortly before he died. The detective claims that she explained the phone call was made in an effort to procure marijuana. However, Shirley later changed her story and is now adamant that she never spoke to Franklin Bonner the day he died. This has led people to speculate that Shirley was in some way trying to hide information in an effort to protect Angel. Angel's lawyers even speculated that Shirley could be a potential suspect and that maybe Angel was withholding information to protect her. But Angel maintains that she knows nothing about the crime, and that she and her grandmother aren't even that close. Therefore, she would not go through these extensive lengths to protect her, especially not at the cost of her own life and the ability to be there for her children. Nevertheless, Shirley recanting and changing her original statement does nothing but bring more attention to it and make it look as though she has something to hide. Whether it's information that could incriminate herself, Angel, or someone else, her credibility was shot after that, and I think it really hurt Angel. As for the call between her brothers, like I said, they were both incarcerated at the time of the investigation and the trial. Therefore, all of their communications were recorded and monitored. The conversation went as follows.
Hey, you guys don't have me on Angel? What happened? It's on case that happened 9 years ago. A murder and an aggravated robbery. And they did that for it. Happened 9 years ago. Yeah. 9 years ago, 2013. Come on now. Think about it. Think hard.
The very cryptic "think hard" that closed out the conversation has led people to speculate that someone in Angel's family, or at the very least, someone close to the family, may have been involved. However, Angel claims that she has no knowledge of what her brothers may or may not have been alluding to on that call. Throughout her trial, Angel was really eager to testify. Even though she was worried about the jury only knowing her as an adult and not as the 13-year-old girl they were essentially deciding the fate of, she still desperately wanted to get on the stand and testify. She wanted to be heard. Despite this, when given the opportunity to take the stand, Angel's defense attorneys advised her it was in her best interest not to testify. They worried that because she could not explain without a shadow of a doubt why her fingerprints were at the scene, that the prosecution would tear her testimony to shreds. They assured her that they were in a good position and that testifying only stood to hurt her. Reluctantly, she agreed, and from that point, both the defense and prosecution moved to their final arguments before resting their cases. Obviously, when the testimonies concluded, the jury was excused to deliberate. They returned after just 4.5 hours, ready with their verdicts for both defendants. Mallory Vaughn's verdict was handed down first, and the jury chose to acquit him of his charges due to lack of evidence. However, Angel, on the other hand, Angel was found guilty of first-degree felony murder and guilty of attempting to commit an especially aggravated robbery. I know. I've watched the footage of the verdict being delivered probably 10 times by now, and it never gets easier to stomach. I audibly gasped and my jaw dropped the first time I heard it. I could not believe it, and neither could poor Angel. She was immediately and understandably distraught. She began begging to be escorted from the courtroom because she just couldn't stand to be in there anymore. She knew that given the sentence she was looking at, it was likely that she would never see her children again. And that thought completely destroyed her. Now, I want to stop here and make it abundantly clear that I empathize deeply with Franklin Bonner's family. I cannot imagine losing someone you love so suddenly and so brutally. They absolutely deserve to see the guilty party behind bars and to receive honest and true justice. That being said, I don't think that's what happened here. Even if Angel was there, the chances are exponentially higher than they aren't, that she is not the one who is actually responsible for Franklin Bonner's death. Let's not forget that there are 9 additional unidentified sets of fingerprints that were also pulled from the scene, as well as a hair follicle, all of which have never been investigated thoroughly. Knowing that makes it undeniable that there were multiple people involved in this crime. But for some reason, Angel is being railroaded as a scapegoat, despite the fact that she was barely even a teenager when this crime took place. How can the investigators and the prosecution sleep at night, knowing that they have closed a case while simultaneously leaving it wide open, allowing upwards of 9 additional guilty people to go free? I don't care who you are or what you think, that's scary. On November 21st, 2019, Angel was sentenced to life in prison for the felony murder conviction and to 8 years for the aggravated robbery. She isn't eligible for release until February 1st of 2079. That's a minimum of 60 years. I seriously cannot for the life of me believe that. Even if she was there, that just seems like an incredibly harsh sentence for a 13-year-old girl who may or may not have pulled off a piece of duct tape. I don't know, I just don't think it's right. I don't think that she is responsible for that man's death. And I certainly don't think it's appropriate that she spend the rest of her life in prison for it. I'm especially against it considering the fact that, in my opinion, there is so much reasonable doubt in this case. Like I said, I can't believe she was even convicted in the first place. Removed from the theory that she may have been involved in this crime, Angel has never shown any indication before or after the events of January 19th, 2009 that she poses any threat to society. So why hand her down such a severe sentence? I personally think that her lawyers did her a huge disservice in more ways than one, but specifically by not letting her testify. I understand that most lawyers don't want their clients to testify in situations like this, but I think it's hard without hearing from her as you stare at these crime scene photos and you listen to Mrs. Bonner's testimony to connect in your mind that when this crime took place, Angel was not the grown adult woman the jury saw sitting in front of them during the trial. She was a child. I just think hearing her perspective and hearing about where she was at that point in her life straight from her mouth could have done a lot in her favor. But instead, her lawyers basically told her to stay quiet, mind her facial expressions, and do her best to look pitiful. They failed to present any mitigating circumstances, call any character witnesses, or to present their own image of who Angel truly was at the time of the crime. A 13-year-old girl, standing 5 foot tall and weighing roughly 80 pounds. Shy, introverted, and suffering at home. They also failed to capitalize on the fact that Carl Fields, one of the original investigators on the case, was later fired for planting evidence in a different case. But that's a whole other thread that if I start pulling at, we'll be here all day. As of today, Angel is currently serving her sentence at the Deborah K. Rehabilitation Center in Nashville, formerly known as the Tennessee Prison of Women. She's currently awaiting a court hearing for her motion to appeal her conviction, but that's been pushed back multiple times. Thankfully, though, her appeal will be handled by a different legal team than her original trial. She, too, felt as though her representation was inadequate. She felt as though they didn't object to certain points or speak up on certain matters that she believes could have strengthened the argument for her innocence. There is a petition available on change.org, organized to help in demanding a retrial in Angel's case. If you're interested in signing that, I will make sure to have it linked in the description box down below. If you have a free moment, I urge you to consider it, as I personally believe she was wrongfully convicted. But other than that, we're about wrapped for today. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments down below. As always, I thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and to listen to this story. Before you head out, if you could give this video a thumbs up, it only takes a second and it really helps out the channel a lot, so thanks in advance. If you haven't already and you'd like to, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime or creepy history content each week, and I'd love to see you back here in my next video. While you're at it, just turn on the post notifications. I am trash at posting on the same day each week, so having that turned on will help make sure you don't miss the next time I upload. But until then, stay safe and have a good week. Bye, guys.